you coaches would like to be able to communicate anything to anyone at any time, regardless of the content, regardless of the person that you're speaking to? What if I told you that there are ways to phrase what you are doing so it is more likely to be accepted by the client? Wouldn't that be interesting to know? Let me tell you a little bit about this, because the number one mistake, not number two, number one, the number one mistake coaches make, in fact, you know what, let's broaden this. The number one mistake people make when they're communicating, so coaches, salespeople, right, just people in general, is that they sell, i.e. they communicate from their own model of reality, from their own language, than from the person they're speaking to. It's the number one mistake in sales. People sell from their model instead of the model of the person they're talking to. But as a coach, if you speak from your model of reality, from your language, instead of the person you're speaking to, then you risk it not being communicated. Let me illustrate this with a story. You know, let's say I fly to Europe. I go to France, okay? So I fly from Canada to France. It's an overnight flight. It's not very long, so I get there, I'm tired, it's the morning. You know, I got to deal with the jet lag or whatever, but I haven't had a really good sleep. And in the morning, my voice is kind of croaky, you know, so I go to cafe. Of course, it's like 7 in the morning. I want to get a cafe. That'll help me up. So, but somebody gets there before me. So the person in front of me is ordering a coffee, and he says, you know, I would like a coffee, please. And the barista behind the counter is like, what? And the guy goes, oh, right. France. I'm in France. I would like a coffee, please. Well, now the barista feels a bit insulted. Like, he's not an idiot. You don't have to shout at me. So now he's like, you know, and the guy's getting desperater in front of me. He's like, please, me, coffee, please. Now I, you know, push the guy aside, and in my croaky voice, 7 in the morning, my grade 13 French, I say, excusez-moi, je voudrais un café, s'il vous plaît, monsieur. Guy hands me a coffee. Why? Because it's more effective to whisper in someone else's language than it is to shout in your own. As a coach, you need to understand this concept. Not everybody processes the world the way in which you do it. There are many, many models. They're all wonderful. I'm not to say one is better than the other, but just understanding that there are many models of reality that people will take in the world. You need to recognize, do you know what the model of reality is of your client? Right? Do you know the model of reality of your client? Would you even have acknowledged that before watching this video? It's critical to successfully communicating where you want the client to go, from them understanding it the way that you're presenting it. It's basically the basis of successful coaching, and you need to know how to do it. So let's talk a little bit about models of reality. What does that mean? Well, so there you are, you know, you're you, your client's them, you know, you got your own meat suit, they got their own meat suit, you're separate, you know, you can tell, even though you're a projection, we talked about earlier, you're still separate, right? So you process the world differently. But the way we process the world is through our 5 senses, right? We process seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and our touching kinesthetic sense. So that's the way in which we process the world, right? So the world is, you know, coming at us. Think about it like this. Outside of us are millions of bits of information, okay? In 1954, a bunch of scientists, Miller, Orme, Van Uxel, Pribham, they were trying to quantify this. This was the beginning of, you know, developing computers and the tote model and things like that. And they were trying to quantify what's available out here. So they measured millions of bits of information available for your 5 senses to process. And then they measured, well, how much can a human being actually process? And what they found was a human being could process about 126 bits a second. So, you know, Miller wrote a big paper called The Magic Number 7, plus or minus 2 chunks, blah, blah, blah. It's, you know, people debate this, and they get debatey about the wrong things. First of all, let's understand something in terms of orders of magnitude. In the 50s, there were millions of bits of information. So now what are there? Trillions, quadrillions? I mean, it's gone up for sure. So let's just say millions, billions, trillions out here. And what the scientists found was hundreds, you know, hundreds. So millions, billions, trillions, hundreds, maybe thousands, but that's it. Millions, billions, trillions, hundreds, or thousands, which means when we're taking in reality, we're discarding most of it. We're discarding most of reality, and we're just taking in hundreds out of millions, billions, trillions. So can you respect the fact that your client probably doesn't take it in the same way that you do? They probably have a different way of looking at it. One of the best models I've ever seen for chopping it up in a kind of rudimentary, basic way, but very important, is called representational systems, right? So representational systems are one way of looking at how we distill, so we delete, distort, and generalize millions, billions, trillions to hundreds. Okay, millions, billions, trillions, hundreds. And representational systems is a four way of looking. I like four. It's kind of easy to remember, right? So there's sort of four different ways that you might process reality. So in this case, we have visual. So you'd prefer to represent it visually. We have auditory, right? So you prefer to represent the world through your auditory sense. We have kinesthetic, right? That would be through the sense of touch. So there are people who are kinesthetic. And then finally, we have what we call digital, which is like people who prefer to process the world through their brain, like a computer would, taking in data and in a dissociated way, analyzing it. So these are the four basic representational systems. You'll notice that olfactory and gustatory are left out because people tend not to primarily process the world through smelling and tasting, although they can, but it's not, primary for the majority of people. So it's VAK and what we call this. So this is V, right? A, K, and we call this AD, which is digital, auditory digital, okay? Now, these are four different rep systems. So how do you determine it? Well, we've got a quiz. You could go to greatnessyou.com/quiz and take a quiz and figure out what your rep system is, figure out what your client is. But there's also a much easier way to figure it out. You can listen to the words, right? Visual people use words like look and see. Do you see what I'm saying? Auditory person, do you hear me? Does this sound good to you? Kinesthetic person would say, does this feel good? I get a gut reaction. And then a digital person might say, I comprehend this, I understand this, I can process this. And so they use those words, and the way in which you reach them is to use their words. So notice how I'm going to say the same sentimental thing. I'm going to say the same meaning in the following sentences, but I'm going to cloak them in the representational system of the person receiving the message. So it's like me going to France and speaking French. I'm trying to cloak my message in their language. So I would say to a visual person, if this looks good to you, then we'll go ahead and we will see about getting the paperwork signed, and so you'll be able to see it ready to go. To an auditory person, I would say, if this proposal sounds good to you, then why don't we make an appointment? We'll make an appointment, and we will get this so that it really resonates for you to take the next step. Okay. A kinesthetic person we might say, if this feels good to you, then we'll go ahead and set up the next steps by handling the paperwork. And finally, with the digital person, I might say, if this is something that you can understand and that you can accept, then we will process the terms of this agreement. So I've basically said the same thing using four different languages in which to communicate my sentiment. That's the power of representational systems. And you need to know what your client is in order to be able to serve them better. Now, that's just one model, representational systems. There are many models of reality, and we should explore that.